All right, we're moving over there. Slowly but surely, we'll wake everything up. My screen's telling me something I haven't seen before, so I don't know what that means. Oh, look, we are coming up live over there on the other side of the room. All right, I may have to turn my sound down though. I'll hear myself twice.
Yeah, that gets confusing.
Oh, look, there we are. Slowly but surely. Yep, we can hear ourselves. Ta-da! That's good. We're moving along. All right, now the next question is can I share? Let's see. Will that share properly? I think it will.
Ah, something's there. Oh yes, an owl. I see an owl.
The giant owl. That's right.
A marvelous owl.
Yes, isn't that great? That work from Michelle is just terrific.
Well, and the owl glaring down into the small-toothed dog is just, when the first time I saw that, I laughed out loud.
Isn't that a good one?
It is.
Yeah.
The look on the look in the owl's eyes.
Yeah, that is really she really did a terrific job on that. It's very interesting because the YouTube is like almost like a minute behind where we're talking.
Okay.
Things pop up differently and stuff. Yes, I love the owl from that's Michelle Bavala's work. So my wife's work. She's from her company's called Mesquite Tree Studio. And so she does a lot of the artwork that we've done, especially in the beginning days of, building up Small Tooth Dog Publishing. And she, for one of our series, she did a javelina, which was this one. So she did this. It's a line of cut javelina. So we wanted, and this one's in a circle. So we wanted to develop. Like a trilogy of Sonoran animals. And so the owl, which was, or is, this one, the owl, which is that one there. So the owl is like the second one. And so we decided that what we would do is just kind of go with the Tucson, because the Tucson Festival of Books has its own animal each year. And so 2 years ago when it was live, it was the javelina. So we did that one. Plus we did it for Story Rise. And then, so this year it's the owl, the burrowing owl, and it's that design. So I don't know what next year is yet. So we're going to wait till the Tucson Festival of Books tells us what's happening. And I'm going to give a little test here to the, yeah, all right, good. All right, so the YouTube seems to be live.
Okay.
And we'll see that. Kelsey, let me know if you are over there on the other side. We still have a moment or two before we're actually out here. But anyway, so the owls were terrific. The lino cuts of those, I just love those. I can't wait to see all three of those on a shirt.
Yeah. Once then, that would be, you get the whole collection. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I have, so we're doing giveaways of shirts, right?
Yes.
On this. So this is one of the gray shirts, the gray crew necks. And I think it looks terrific on this gray. It turned out to be pretty fantastic. So we have different colors available. I do think, Harriet, that we got your purple shirt working. So
okay.
When you open the package, you'll find out.
It's like either yes or no. Yeah. Of course, good. The package needs to arrive, which is, one of the.
Yeah, right. All right. Looks like Phyllis has joined us. Hello, Phyllis. I see you over there on YouTube. Yes. Yeah. Phyllis wants to know if this is a seance that I'm waiting to hear if Kelsey's live with us or not.
Knock if you can hear me.
Yes. Knock 3 times. She's actually in the other office, the other room next to us. So she can knock on the door. She actually could knock on the door and tell me if she's alive or not.
She's there or not.
Yeah. So this is interesting. If I turn the camera this way, the closet is crooked, but the signs are right. If I turn it this way, the closet's crooked and the signs are wrong. It's so weird. I don't know why. Everything's straight on the wall. I don't know what's going on.
That's, yeah, huh.
You know, it's not science straight, but it's
I was going to say, I have this little green cube level that's just adorable and tells me when things are level, but it also tends to fall off things and go merrily bouncing across the floor.
Right. Well, we know that these are level because, we used real tools, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
they're slightly off. They're like a quarter of an inch in the wrong space.
Mhm.
But at some point you just say,
Yeah.
too bad. Phyllis, you can buy an owl shirt, but also you'll be able to enter a drawing for an owl shirt very shortly. So we'll give you the instructions for that, how to enter the drawing for the owl shirt and possibly win a fantastic prize. Oh. So anyway, so at the end of the call, we'll tell people how to do that. The good thing about the drawing is that once your name is in it, you're in it for all 6 drawings. So if you don't win in the first draw, your name is still in the pot. So we'll do that. And I'll give you the location for that towards the end of the call here. Your camera needs to move left and be on the same plane as the wall. I'm not on the same plane as anyone. So
You get some advice from somebody, huh?
yeah. So I guess I'm in trouble. No one's on the plane. All right, we will give this just a moment here and then we'll go. So I am delighted that you are here, folks. I'm Sean Bavala from the Small Tooth Dog Publishing Group, as you've probably figured out because everything is saying that right now. Welcome to the virtual Tucson Festival of Books. We are delighted that the wise people who run the show at Tucson have encouraged exhibitors to be doing live streams. We're honored to be in part of that again. We're honored to be some tiny, tiny, tiny little piece of making the Tucson Festival work. The Tucson Festival is really important to us as a publishing company. We're based in Arizona. Tucson is a terrific event. It has come such a long way since its earliest days. It's so well organized and so well put together. And of course, everyone wants to be live. We all want to be in the same room and we want to be standing across tables and having people in live events and sitting outside under tents. We all want to do that, but we can't right now. So we're doing the virtual. And I know that the Tucson Festival has something like 96 author interviews planned. And that's not even counting what the exhibitors are doing. So this should be pretty terrific. Today, we're going to do a number of interviews. Our first one this morning, the one that you've tuned into, here is with Harriet Cole, who is the author of 15 Pounds of Muscle and Bounce. But before we go into the interview with her, I want to tell you, that my computer is not working, is what I want to tell you. There we go. Technology. There we go. Perfect. I do want to tell you that what else we are doing as part of our live stream this weekend. At noon Arizona time, which is 11 a.m. Los Angeles and 2 p.m. New York. At noon Arizona time, we have an interview with the illustrator of the book we're about to talk about, C.S. Fritz, Casey Fritz. We're going to talk with him. We actually had to pre-record that interview, but we will play that interview and we will be live in the chat box to talk to you about what we're saying. So that was a terrific interview. And then at 1 p.m. Arizona time, Laura Packer and I, also an author, also a storyteller, are going to talk about how the oral storytelling tradition can inform your writing. And I talked to her about this yesterday, and I'm very excited about where this is going to go. That conversation about how being an oral storyteller influences what you do in writing, especially in terms of character development and understanding your audience. So we're excited about that. Saturday, today at 3 o'clock Arizona time, we're doing a Kidlit panel, which I think Harriet's going to come back and talk with us on that one as well, and as well as other authors in our group. We're going to talk about Kidlit. What's the impact of Kidlit? Why do people write Kidlit children's books? Why do they do that? We're just going to have an open floor and talk about that. And of course, your questions will be welcome there. And then tonight, I'm doing a workshop called So You Want to Publish a Book. We're going to talk about the changes in the publishing industry, what it looks like right now, What are your options as an author? What are the options that you have available to you now that even 20 years ago, you really didn't have available to you? When I published my first book called Daddy Teller, back in 2009, I believe it was 2008, 2009, we were at the cutting edge of what types of options were out there. So how has the world changed and what things can you do? And that's tonight at 7 o'clock. Then tomorrow, Sunday, we have 3 more live streams. The first one Sunday at 10 o'clock Arizona time. We're going to talk to whichever authors are choosing to join us for that. We have kind of a group of people that are coming in for that. Again, I think Harriet may be joining us for that as well. What have you learned on your publishing journey? What's it been like to be published? There's kind of a romantic view of publishing, and then there's the real view of publishing, and what is that experience like? At noon, I will be talking to you, just really kind of sharing thoughts about why you should not write your book first, why writing your book, especially if you're doing nonfiction or if you're doing work for families and children, while there's other steps that you can take that will make your book better. But so don't write your book first. We'll talk about that. And then Sunday at 3 o'clock, we'll talk about what's new and exciting. What kind of projects are we working on? We have some advanced art to show you. We'll talk about some of the books that are coming with authors that have material coming out from the Small Tooth Dog Publishing Group. So that is our background today. We do invite you to stay all the way through the end so that we can talk about some of the other things that we offer you, and you'll be able to get your name in the drawing as well. So there we go. So let's go right into where we are today, and that is our interview with author Harriet Cole. Harriet Cole is in New Mexico, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I've known Harriet for quite a while, and she has such a diverse background and is such an interesting person to work with, and we've been very pleased to be able to publish her book, 15 Pounds of Muscle and Bounce. Terrific book. So let's all welcome Harriet Cole. Woohoo! Yay for you. Hi, Harriet.
Hi, Sean.
So good to see you. I got to change my screen size here so I can actually see what's going on.
Okay, I'll wait for you to get your technology in line.
Here, so now I can't see anything. All right, now I can see things, what's going on. Perfect, good. So Harriet, welcome. So glad to see you. Where in New Mexico are you?
I am in Cedar Crest, which is a small village east of Albuquerque on the other side of the Sandia Mountains, and actually up in the mountains themselves. So I'm in a interesting place that we bought as a challenge, a project, and a dream to dream, and we've got plans for it. But it's also an interesting place in terms of, after 30 years in Phoenix, I'm not used to having to put on more than one layer to go outside, and
Wow.
There's snow and fun stuff like that, and also things like, bobcats and things like that. So that's where I am, and I'm having a lot of fun here. But part of the fun is that this book has just come out, and that's certainly added to the excitement of the whole last year.
Right.
You asked me to introduce myself, and I'm not going to do a really totally traditional introduction, but I'm going to basically, I came, as Sean alluded to, from a family that could be called a STEM family. Like my father and both his parents were chemists. My other grandfather was an engineer. My mother should have been an engineer, but it was the 50s, so she wasn't. And when I was about 9 or 10 years old, my aunt on my father's side, who was a professor of classics at the University of Chicago, and therefore very much not STEM, sent me a book. And I'm going to show you this book because you asked what book really shaped my world. This is the old classic, Golden Treasury of Myths and Legends. Mm-hmm. And I read this thing so many times that when I first heard the stories orally when I was a student at South Mountain College, I saw the pictures from this book in my head. This book had moved into my head so thoroughly as a child. And they are, when we're talking about interesting illustrations, not what you'd consider standard illustrations for a children's book. And right. they're kind of strange. And right. this book, I think this book, in ways that I didn't really know until years and years later, really shaped how I view story and how I view how you can craft story for kids. Because this book, while it didn't it didn't violate any of the norms of the 50s on what you put in a kid's book. It still took things, so it was very, very real. And so that's the book that's kind of like the grandparent book of this book.
Yeah, of 15 pounds of muscle
Of
and
Muscle
bounce.
and Bounce, yes.
Yeah. Let me pull the other screen back up for a moment, and we'll take a look at this. We've done some really interesting things in this book, and we're going to talk to the illustrator quite a bit here in the next session. But even when the first time you told me about this book, I remember we were in a classroom at South Mountain Community College, and you were talking about how there's a story behind the lich and the moss that grows on the edges of this particular location. And the story was about that, how it was the brains of old people that fell from the sky. And I thought, man, I need to publish that book.
I remember you said, write your book.
Yeah. And how good it was to be able to publish that book too, as well. But I think the art in this book is the first thing that people will go, okay, this is different, because that's what people see visually first before they get to the words that you have written. The first thing they see is this really unique, interesting art. The piece has got to get up to Doverfell, which is the piece with the fox and the ducks, the cat who ate the world, and Cottager and the cat as well. A lot of cats in this book. Cats and porridge. Lots of cats and porridge. So, so we've got some interesting stuff inside this book. Let's kind of dig in a little bit to why you wrote your book. Kind of that standard question. What moved you to say, you started with this background you had as a child in the book that you're referencing there. What kind of moved you to say this collection needs to be assembled, and why did you choose these stories?
I had been, of course, thinking about writing a book for a very long time. As in, I started my first attempt at a historical novel as a sixth grader, and tried to write a extremely ridiculous story set between the Bronze and I believe it was the Bronze and Iron Ages of Scotland or some such, but it had Vikings in it. I mean, it was fun, but it was completely ridiculous. But I've been writing, basically all my life. And when I fell into storytelling, I discovered this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful series of stories rooted in the oral tradition. And it did not take me long at all to sort of develop the idea of somewhere in all this material is the book I can and will write, and that it will really make a difference in the world in some way. And I played with a lot of ideas. And Sean, you were always sort of in the background saying, write a book, come on, write a book, come on, not that book, but write a book,
Right.
and
Right.
so I started thinking more and more in terms of the stories that I knew really, really well and what I could do with them. And then the thing that kind of popped the whole thing open in terms of what kind of book this was going to be was I was telling stories of trolls to an audience that consisted of a number of exceedingly they weren't all that interested late elementary school, early middle school kids. It was at the point,
Right.
if you remember the time when the schools closed for several days in a row because of the teachers were all angry, and rightfully so. And I took part in the project to provide some entertainment to these kids that were at loose ends. So I was, but stories were too much like school, and they were kind of fidgety. Then I told a story, and it's a classic Norwegian one, in which the troll is fooled and is stabbing himself in the stomach, dying. And I gave it all the gore I could because of the age. And two little boys in the front row looked up at me and said, "Ew!" And a click.
Yeah.
That's the kind of story I need, the kind that makes that kind of kid have that kind of reaction, whether he or she wants to or not.
Yes. Yes, terrific. That moment as a storyteller, especially with the older kids, like what you're talking about. Like I don't work in schools and so much anymore, but if I do, it's only older kids. And that moment in certain stories, like in Seven Ravens, where she cuts off her finger in order to put it in the door, to open the door to save her brothers, and the whole group of 10-year-olds who think they're so swift at 10 years old, they're just like, I'm with you. I hear you, man. I hear you.
And Laura Rutherford gets the same result with that story she tells about the dragon who squeezes all his blood into a hole in the ground to impress a girl and then expires. And I've heard her tell that to the same age. It's the same sort of thing where it's like, oh, this isn't for babies. This is really speaking to me, and that's the cool point.
Yeah, this isn't for babies is probably a big chunk of why I grabbed this book, because I'm and I've said this, and I repeat some of this with Casey's interview. There's lots of stuff for essentially anything from birth to third grade.
Yeah.
There's tons of stuff out there, but stuff that really starts to dig in, especially in this genre, stuff to really starts to dig in with that 4th, 5th, 6th grade piece. There isn't a lot of really juicy stuff out there.
Right.
They're too young for YA and all of the stuff that YA does, how important YA is, young adult fiction and young adult books. So I really like this. This gave us a place to mess around with some cool stuff. Folks, you are watching the live stream from Small Tooth Dog Publishing Group during the Tucson Festival of Books 2021. And I am interviewing Harriet Cole. I'm Sean Bavala, the publisher at Small Tooth Dog. When you think about the really bizarre set of stories that are in here, do you have a favorite story of what you've put in your book?
Oh, favorite story. Some of this is a matter of the story that I'm working on, the story that I just read, the story that I'm thinking about is always my favorite. But in some ways, my favorite is the one that we've titled Gotta Get Up to Dovrefjell, where the fox cooks the goose and the duck. And this is partly because this particular story for me has been unbelievably flexible, because the whole deal behind the story is, well, there's a hen who has been told in a dream to get up the Dovrefjell, and we find she saved the world at the very end because she did it, and it makes no sense whatsoever, which is what it makes is fun. But it turned out to be a fantastic folktale to tell at the beginning of the classes I taught at South Mountain Community College, whether it was storytelling or mythology or children's lit, whatever it was, because it really resonated with the community college students. And I changed it to South Mountain because there was a South Mountain right next to the, and then I told it in the South Mountain Environmental Education Center's events for the same thing. And now I've got a South Mountain over there and a Dovrefjell and an idea over there. But I think that idea of, and it's so ridiculous and it's absolutely crazy, and ducks and geese are running into each other. And yes, the fox eats the dumber birds. I mean, so it has that point too. And it's just fun. And it's the one where one day I was walking along in the public, minding my own business, and a small child came up to me, medium-sized child came up to me, didn't know her couldn't tell that I knew her. She looked at me and she said, "Gotta get up South Mountain, gotta get up South Mountain." She'd heard my story. She picked me out of a crowd and there she was.
That's really funny. As I know that I've been on programs with you where you've told it. I think we told it at, I know Phyllis Raleigh is watching on the YouTube right now, and South Mountain Educational Center, which she put together programs for that. I know I was on a program with you for that. That's really funny. Isn't that weird what kids click onto in stories? Why do you think that happens? What do you think there is about storytelling that just creates these memes and moments for kids?
I think kids have, and this is not a scientific opinion, it's an opinion. Kids have a whole bunch of unanchored imagination running around in their minds. And they especially the kind of kids who connect well with stories, they have a whole bunch of unanchored imagination. And as they are exposed to stories, bits and pieces of various stories, whether it be whether they're reading it, whether they're having it read to them, whether they're hearing it, bits and pieces of the stories just kind of in some way clamp onto some piece of that unanchored imagination, and then that gives them like a seed in a pearl, that gives them something to start building stuff around out of the rest of their imagination. And so they suddenly can build this big internal story that goes in whatever direction they want it to go, because something they heard or read just gave them that little push into, yeah, and the imagination gelled around it.
I love that imagery of unanchored imagination.
I suffer from it.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
I want to talk more about that.
Okay.
That's really interesting. Unanchored imagination. Is some of that come from, especially since we're talking kind of that 4th, 5th, 6th grade, abstract thinking doesn't really become a thing in a child until 10-ish, 9, 10, 11
Right.
years old. And just the concept of pieces of their imagination are looking for something to anchor to. Wow. Do you find that with any other stories you tell? Are there other stories outside of the book, outside of 15 pounds of muscle and bounce, that you've had, that kids have really latched onto, maybe come back later and said to you, you're the one who told? Have you ever had that happen to you?
To a certain extent. No, this was the most specific one, but I do remember I was telling somewhere, not to kids, and I'm afraid I don't really remember where it was, but I think it was probably at South Mountain. And the young lady walked up to me and greeted me very warmly and was very, very happy to see me. And I was sort of in that polite state you get of, yeah, I'm really glad to see you, but I sure would like to know who you are.
Yeah, right.
And turns out that she had listened to stories when I was like a first-year student in storytelling. The church I attended, they had the theory, if you show signs of a talent, they put you to work. And so they had me telling stories to the kids. And she was one of the very small kids that had heard me, that was like 10 years earlier, had heard me every Sunday, trying to deal with both folk tales and sacred stories with this repeating group of kids. And it had always stuck in her mind. She followed me on Facebook. I didn't really realize, because I didn't recognize the name, but she followed me on Facebook. And when she found she was somewhere where she could come back and hear me in person 10 years later, she was right there in the front row. So obviously, again, unanchored imagination, something really clicked there.
Yeah. It's really interesting how that happens, because as you're saying, both of us have been at this long enough that kids we talk to are now adults. And I've had kids tell me later that story about the chicken that you tell. I remember that one. Or the frog stories, or a lot of them. I've had a lot of kids talk about, because I used to do a lot of what we call sacred telling, right?
Yeah.
And so kids will come back and say, I remember that story about King David that you told.
Yes.
And for some of them, I think it was the first time that unanchored imagination got anchored onto something they could grip onto, especially in terms of religion. Fascinating stuff. It's a great concept to really think about. Hey, folks, if you're watching the YouTube stream right now live, and by live, I mean it's about 10:25 on Saturday, March 6th. If you have a question or something you want to ask Harriet or I, please go ahead and put that in the box there on YouTube, which on my screen is to the right of the video. Where it is on your phone, I'm not sure. Kelsey is helping us maintain the chat box today, so I'm grateful for her work in that. Kelsey also handles a lot of the fulfillment work for the company as well. So I just get to say to Kelsey, hey, go mail this, and it's gone and it's done and taken care of, and it's terrific. So I think she knows more about mailing stuff now than I do. So I'm glad that she's with us for that. When you look, Harriet, when you look at the book, with the art that we had commissioned through Casey Fritz, is there any particular picture that really stands out for you? There's lots of pictures; they're all good. We get that, but is there one for you that really you're like, oh, that's the picture I really like?
Oh, totally. And it is the picture that goes with that story about the old folks trying to take a kettle of porridge to heaven and ending up falling off the ladder. And it's the porridge and the brains that make the lichen on the shore of Iceland, and and make the kid house pay is what it's titled in the book. And it's the one, you can probably pull up a better example of it.
Yeah.
When they are falling down, and there's the ladder, and there they are upside down and backwards, and the and there goes the porridge in between them, and everything's going to go splat really soon.
Yeah, that
And
really,
there's a cloud there. Yeah. It's
yeah,
so simple, and yet it so encapsulates the foolishness of those old folks for the whole story.
yeah. It's like a lot of these stories. They're just so bizarre. They're not like, they don't like have the Disney kind of model of X, X, Y,
Mhm.
Z. They're just like that one with the make the kid house pay, which it's so ridiculous. It's just a ridiculous story. Um, yeah, I think it was that level of ridiculous. It's funny that you really like that picture, because that's the one that, in my mind, started this journey. At least when I came into your journey on this, that's the one that started it. It's interesting. I've asked Casey this, myself and you, what the favorite pictures are, and we all have different answers. So
Mhm.
you'll have to watch the next one to get Casey's
Yes, I'm
answer to
going to.
that. But that's interesting. What's interesting about that too, as a publisher, is when whenever you get art and words and stuff from people, everything needs a little editing, needs a little twisting. It's got nothing to do with the talent of the person who submitted it to you. It's about making it right for that particular project, right? So, with a lot of pictures, Casey and I had to go back and forth. He's a pro, we're pros. It's all good. But that picture is one of the few that I went, yeah, that's it. There were two pictures in the book that did that. And the one with the one falling off the ladder was like, yeah, that's
Mm.
precisely it. It's so subtle. It's because some of the other
Yeah.
pictures are so
Yeah, it's and the other thing for me that makes it very interesting is it's not the perspective that I see it from when I'm telling the story. As I tell the story, I'm seeing it from being on the ladder, I'm not seeing
yeah.
it from a drawn back. So it's like, oh yeah, that's what it would look like from out there. There they go.
Yeah. That's an interesting point too, because we're working on a couple of really young children's books right now. And one of them I wrote, one of them is coming from Tamara Norwood, who will be on one of our calls later. And the one that I wrote, which essentially is, something to do with a small dog in the ocean. When I wrote that story, I had this image in my head of every picture.
Okay.
And then when we finally settled on and hired the artist to do the work, she kicked back the first couple of rough drafts of stuff, which were totally different than what I saw in my head. But yet I was like, oh, that works.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting the images we get. It's interesting the images we get as authors versus what the illustrator does. And I think that dance of, there's really three principles in this. There's the author, there's the illustrator, and the publisher. And we as a publisher tend to bring the authors in much earlier into the illustrator discussion. And so we get different perspectives on that. The stories that are in the book, are there stories that you didn't put in the book that weren't quite ready for this? Is there a story that you might tell but not put in a book?
Mostly the ones that I tell and enjoy telling that are the same kind of story that I wouldn't and didn't put in the book are the ones that are more commonly told. The ones that have been written down so many times that there's a way to do it, because you find everybody's. Let's use for an example, because it's nice and gory and violent, as one young man said, the Three Billy Goats Gruff, the most beloved of all Norwegian folk tales. And I was looking at it from all kinds of angles for another project, not for recreating it for this book. And it was fascinating to see the number of ways that people got it right and got it wrong. But it has already been done so many times that it's almost like you say Three Billy Goats Gruff, and certainly in most circles, in a surprising number of circles, everybody knows what you're talking about right then and there. And so
Right.
I was going for the further out fringes of stuff that you haven't heard of. Even many of the Boots stories, because they're so closely related to the Jack stories of Scotland and England, are like, everybody knows this story. I want the story where it's like, they did what? Yeah.
Right. Right. Phyllis says, do you ever warn an audience beforehand when you're telling us her question as written is, do you ever warn an audience beforehand, if you are squeamish, you might not want to listen? Do you ever tell an audience this story is going to be really gross?
Not generally, not. Generally, I would not start a set with any audience with one of these ones that's kind of way out on the fringe, unless like it's a college class and I already know that we're talking about stories, way out on the fringe or something. But in an audience that came in of their own free will to listen to my stories, these are the stories that are saved in my hip pocket for when I sense that the audience is ready for it. I'd start with the Three Billy Goats Gruff for that audience, because if there were maybe super sensitive people, though I find that you can't really, I as a storyteller cannot really shape my programming or my storytelling around the needs of super sensitive people. That's just I'm not that kind, that's not my audience. If they
Right.
come in and so I've never ever actually pre-warned for anything. I might pre-warn this program is intended for 10 and up.
Yes.
This
Right.
book is intended for 10 and up, but I
Right.
don't say, oh, this story you might not want to listen to.
Right.
No, I just go figure you're here, and if you don't think it's suitable, you can come up to me afterwards and chew me out.
We do say on the back of this book that some images may be unsuitable for small children.
Mm-hmm.
But also we don't market this. We're not marketing this to small children.
Right.
The only reason I put that on there is because if somebody buys it if somebody picks it up and goes, oh, this would be great for my grandkid, I want them to think, okay, is your grandkid 5? Because this isn't
Right.
the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I do put content warnings on programs, as you say. But people know when they book me what we're going to do.
Yeah.
You can plan what you can plan. And I took a library gig many years ago, which was designed for second grade or something like that. That's what they told me. Which like third grade, second grade is like the absolute lowest I can go and still be even remotely effective. But what came to the story time were the little ones who were just out of diapers. So I had an audience. Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. I had an audience full of kids who were just into pull-ups for the first time. And they all had Velcro shoes, and putting the shoes on was a new thing for them. So they were like the whole time. They were like lap babies. It was like,
mm-hmm.
And for that age, you don't do a 30-minute program.
No.
It was the longest 15 minutes of my life.
I fully get that.
Yeah. So I do understand saying, look, this program is intended for.
Right.
And, if I do end up with a room full of pull-up babies, then you can't do the stuff you can do for third graders.
Right.
That's good. Folks, if you have any things you want to ask or put into the question box, go ahead and do that if you would. Harriet, you had an interesting upbringing, different than in a different place than many people are. Do you think, first off, tell us about that, and do you think any of that influenced the way you view the world as far as stories go?
Oh yeah, it definitely does, and that's one of those mini projects that is on the back burner and may stay there for a while. And the very short version is that I grew up from infancy on in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which is just about 100 miles north of where I am right now. And during the 1950s and on into the 60s, and actually even beyond, because it still is, Los Alamos was the site of the National Laboratory, which during the World War II developed the first atomic bombs, and then on through the 50s, which is when I really clearly remember it as being a child there, was very, very, very involved in all the Cold War weapons development, which basically meant that none of us knew what our daddies did. And none of us had a clue what our daddies did. And there was no discussion. I say it as a joke, but it's not. If my father had eaten at the cafeteria at the lab and had a hamburger, the line between lab and home was so unbreakable that he could not inform my mother as she got ready to cook hamburgers that he'd already had a hamburger that day. He honestly would sit down quietly and eat a second hamburger because he could not break that line. Wow. This meant for me, and it took me a while to get that. This meant for me that there were all these untold stories floating around somewhere out there beyond my reach. Because there were stories. There were not only the stories of the science, which in itself is a fascinating story, but stories of the personalities, stories of the individuals. Because the guys who were the leaders, who were doing the leadership stuff, they were real characters. And slowly I started hearing and learning some of the stories about, oh, Mr. So-and-so did this professionally, good grief. And then, oh yeah, and remember the time Mr. So-and-so, well, I'll make a really short one. We had a family friend who eventually won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And when I heard it on the radio, because we had the kind of local radio station that announced this kind of stuff, I called my mother up and I said, do you suppose the Nobel Committee knew about the time that Mr. Taube took the chains off his car by unfastening the outside clips and throwing the chains over the wheel onto the axle? And they still gave him, So, and I think it was that fascination with the silence that has led me into a deep, deep interest both in written and in oral stories, and in the stories that carry all the oral tradition stories that carry all the wisdom, because there was this big bubble of silence that I lived in. I mean, it wasn't a silent bubble. There was all kinds of stuff going on, but there was this shell of silence around it.
Wow, very interesting. I want to kind of merge from that into a discussion of carrying complex cultures across cultures.
Oh yeah.
You talk about in kind of a shroud of silence around the work that you did, which is definitely a cultural thing. I always call it the wrong city, but from Los Alamos, I mean, that's a culture.
Yes.
How does that translate? So let's talk about the last thing I really want to dig in with you a bit on 15 Pounds is the Thor and Loki stories at the end of the book.
Oh yeah.
Which were quite a challenge to be able to edit. And so can you talk a little bit about some of the struggles that occurred with trying to get those, because it's a whole cultural thing. It's not just the Avengers from Marvel. It's a whole different thing.
Right.
And matter of fact, these stories have nothing to do with what people think Norse mythology is. So can you talk about some of our struggles with that a little bit?
Oh yes, because that was a very real struggle, and it was and it's not the first time I basically had that struggle. I mean, the first version of that struggle that I had was when I was working on my master's thesis at Prescott College, and my master's thesis was about telling the Volsunga saga, and the part that in the saga is in an entirety, I once counted up, but 4 or 5 mothers kill large numbers of their children because they are pissed at the children's father.
Right.
And when I was working on this at first, my Prescott primary advisor just said, how can you tell this stuff? This stuff is horrible. And actually the whole center of the thesis became looking at how you have to look at the cultural structure of where the story comes from, both in terms of staying true to that, but also not leaving your audience in complete dismay because you have violated, you've put the god of Thor in a dress, and he's said some pretty rude things about being put in a dress that do not go in our culture at all.
Yeah, things that we couldn't say in the book, right,
that we could not say in the book. You can get away with it a little bit more, of course, with oral storytelling, because it isn't sitting there staring at you. and you can do it with the faces and, you can do it. And you're right there afterwards to answer questions when somebody comes up and says, how can you make that story so good when she killed her children and fed them to their father?
Right.
And,
I want to interrupt you just for a second. I want to point out that the stories about mothers eating or killing their children is not in this book.
Exactly. And I didn't mean to. I was just that's the roots of where this thought process are made.
Ahead,
No mothers eat no children in this book.
Right,
There's a cat that does some inappropriate eating, but that's okay. So we don't have the same. Anyway, you're right. No, none of that stuff in this book. But we did put the God of Thor in a dress, and in the Norse culture, in the what is known of, and I mean known, not Marvel content, but known of, was that this was one of the most, and I'm going to use the word sissy right here on your program, most sissifying things that poor Thor could do. I mean, Loki, who was a trickster, changed gender on a regular basis and species as well. But and so writing the story so that you got the depth of Thor. He was not merely embarrassed and inconvenienced by being stuffed in a wedding gown. His very God though he was, his very self was being attacked by the trickster who caused the whole trouble in the first place. And so it was really hard to thread that needle. And we, as my publisher, who's wise, made us do, was go on the a little bit less culturally appropriate for the Norse, but sort of keep the flavor aspect of it. But when you're working with the old sacred stuff, the stuff that's been there for a long time, you really have to make the effort to understand the culture, the world in which it was told, and not just your world. And this is for anything mythological or mythologically rooted.
Yes, absolutely. And it's trying to translate that. And so I'm editing a book, and I was editing, and also Kieran also did a tremendous amount. Kieran and Kelsey and myself really did a lot of work on editing this book, and just so many perspectives. As a company whose mission statement says we're an inclusive, diverse organization, I really had to struggle with what are we saying about the Thor and the dress piece.
Yes.
Thor thought for a moment and then said, what are people going to say about me if I put on a wedding dress? That would be unacceptable for me to do. So we cleaned up that. We said that because he feels that way.
Yes.
That. So later on it says, let's see. Oh, I lost it. There's a piece in here where I lost where we put it, but we changed it to say, Thor says, what are people going to say about me? And one of the other characters in the story says, what they'll say is you're very wise. And so we kept that. So we had to make that translation that in its cultural perspective at the time, that was a different thing. But I can't put that in a book now. Because first off, we as an organization don't believe that. We don't believe that Thor is less because he puts on a dress. But culturally in the story, we get that. So it was a real interesting challenge to kind of translate some of that stuff over as well. Interesting. All right, so I'm going to plant a seed in your head. I'm going to do this the housekeeping pieces of this presentation, and the last thing I'm going to ask you is, what last words do you have to say about this? So let me switch my screens here. Okay. And if you have any other last minute questions or anything like that, folks, go ahead and put those out there. And let's see. Let's make sure that the Harriet, are you seeing the PowerPoint?
I'm seeing Muscle and Bounce.
And perfect. Okay, good. So we are on the right screen there.
Slide number 6.
Yeah, thank you. The YouTube thing is a little bit behind that. So before we wrap up, I want to tell you a little bit about what we offer here at the Small Tooth Dog Publishing Group. The very first thing I want to tell you about is that if you are especially new to publishing, maybe you're looking at getting your first nonfiction book out, your first kidlit, your first children's book out, etc. We have a checklist, a free publishing checklist, and we call it Are You Ready for Publishing? And to get that, you go to authortip.com and put your email address in there. That puts you on our mailing list, of course. and we will start to send you some educational material about being an author. This stuff is very supportive, teaches you a lot of things, so we hope that you'll do that. Plus, you get the checklist, and there's a short video that explains the checklist as well. And that's when you go to authortip.com, and that's the free publishing checklist. Authortip.com is always valid, even if you're watching this on the replay. So AuthorTip is really, if you're like, I'm just exploring this stuff and just kind of starting to get moving on this, I really want to know about being an author and writing, authortip.com is the way to go ahead and do that. And it looks like looks like Kelsey put that in the box, so I appreciate that. The other piece of this is, if you've been at this for a while and you are a creative, an author, a speaker, a healer, a teacher, and you're trying to explore how do you take this passion capital that you have in your life, how do you put yourself out there to build a stable career as an author? What does that look like now? How does that look like modern? We invite you to go to speaker100.com. And there's about a 25-minute masterclass that I offer on what I call basically the 4 secrets of trying to build a career as a creative. So that's at speaker100.com. We invite you to also go take a look at that as well. So the 2 things you need to be aware of, authortip.com, which is good for anybody, but especially if you're kind of new to this, you're like, wow, I went to the festival, I attended this festival, I saw these interviews, I want to do that. Authortip.com is the place to do it. And then if you're ready for something a little deeper, you want to take a little deeper dig into this and to the work that we offer, that's at speaker100.com. The last thing I'd like to tell you about is, I've got to find my demo. It's hanging on the lighting system here. We're doing a drawing. We're doing some giveaways during the virtual Tucson Festival of Books that we're doing. This is one of the shirts that we're offering. There's a sample of one of the red ones down there below. This is the design we talked about at the beginning of the course. That's the owl from the event, and it says TFOB2021 in the bottom. And Michelle has her little name tag on that. If you would like a chance to win one of these in a drawing, you need to go to smalltoothdog.com/drawing. smalltoothdog.com/drawing. It will ask you for your name and your email address. And on tomorrow night, the 7th at 7 o'clock-ish Arizona time, we will pull 6 winners from the list of names that are in there for you to get a shirt. What you need to be aware of is you have to be at least 13 years old in order to claim one of the shirts. And we're sorry, but currently we can only send these to United States addresses. If you are watching this after March 7th, 2021, clearly the contest will have been closed by then. But especially if you're in the live right now, smalltoothdog.com/drawing will put you into that. That contest closes March 7th, 2021, and it's open to U.S. residents currently to get one of these shirts. We have a variety of sizes and styles. We'll send you a code for that. If your first choice is not available, we're sorry, but see what else you might want to choose out of there as well. So that takes us to smalltoothdog.com/drawing. to get in that, and that contest is open right now, and you can pop over to that as soon as this interview is finished. And so that takes us to the end. Harriet, any kind of concluding thoughts you want to say?
Concluding thoughts. Well, the first and most important concluding thought is I really hope that those of you who have, especially the kids who are maybe think folk tales or fairy tales are for babies, and maybe they're really tired of the idea of the princess always having to be rescued and that kind of stuff. The kids who really like stories of trolls better than stories of princesses, and are maybe need some reading that isn't in any way, shape, or form boring. This is a good one to go for, and it has been based on research. It has been based on discussion. It's not just somebody just thinking, oh, I'll retell the stories and throw in some changes because the old way is boring or something like that. This is based on some academic background stuff as well. So and besides, it's a lot of fun, and the pictures are absolutely awesome. And final reason, my publisher says, that if this book does well, he'll let me do another one. And if you like this one and you buy it and you put up a good review and all that kind of stuff, we get closer to me doing another one. That's
true. That's very true. And also the next book that Harriet has will not be upside down as the one that she has right now, but it will be right side up.
Well, you
know how many times I've done that myself, shown something upside down on a screen. Cool.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, we're very much looking forward to putting more stuff out. I don't have a lot of people in my circles that have master's degrees in Norse mythology. So, so that's pretty good. All right, folks. Thank you all. Nice technique. Upside down book made me look. Thank you very much. Folks, our next event is at noon, Arizona time, March 6th. During the Tucson Festival of Books virtual. I want to thank Harriet Cole for being with us. I know that she's going to be back for other events this weekend, and I'm very pleased for that. So thank you for that. Harriet, thanks for being with us. That's terrific to have had you today.
Thank you, Sean.
Good, thank you. All right, folks, we're going to see you at noon. This replay should be live probably in the next 5 or 6 minutes, however long it takes YouTube to get their act together. Please visit us at smalltoothdog.com. Get your shirt at smalltoothdog.com/drawing. Get your name in there. And if you are looking to start a career in the creative arts as an author, a speaker, healer, teacher, come put your name in at authortip.com, get our checklist, and let's start this journey together. I'm Sean Bavala with the Small Tooth Dog Publishing Group. Thank you all very much. Harriet, I'm going to go ahead and conclude this, but if you'll just hang on a minute, I'll finish up a conversation with you shortly. So let me close this up. Folks, thanks a lot. Good to see you.